This video will look at some for loops which are used in simulations but also in lots of other programs as well. Basically just whenever we want to repeat an operation on a list of items repeatedly, then a for loop comes in handy. So this video will just look at some of the real basics of how a for loop works and of how two for loops work, and basically just to show you how you can start to play with them. So we won't do any econometrics in here. We'll just show you how you can set up a couple of loops and experiment with them. And if you're having trouble following how the for loops are working, then just playing with them like this, just in an experimental kind of way, is helpful to understand how they work. So first of all, I'll just mention that there is this syntax for a sequence which is very handy. So if we do something like 1:1:5, for example, is a shorthand in R that will generate a sequence of numbers from 1 up to 5, or a vector of numbers from 1 up to 5. So we can actually store that, right? So if we go from like that, V is 1 up to 5, then that's now stored in there. So this is a kind of shorthand that's often used in specifying for loops that you've probably seen, and also we can directly specify a for loop in terms of an object which has had a sequence put into it. The sequence doesn't have to start from 1. You can go from like 4 up to 8 or something, or from 8 down to 4 if you want to go in reverse. All of those things are valid sequences, and they can be used to specify things in loops as well. Alright, let's set one up now. So if you've done the pre-listening, then you'll know why we're doing this. We'll set up a sequence like this. My life is 1 to 5, something like that, and then the syntax for the for loop is something like this: for once in my life. It was worth it just for that, wasn't it? And then whatever goes inside of this loop will be executed one time for, so the counter for the loop is the variable called once, and it will execute 5 times because my life is a sequence from 1 up to 5. So for instance, one thing we could put in here is just, let's say we'll print out something using this cat command, which is a way of printing out some text to the screen. It looks a little bit nicer if you're printing text than using the print command, but either would do in this case. So how about that? So if what this should do now, if we run this, is print out, is loop through this command one time for every element in this sequence that we've specified here. So it should go around 5 times. Okay, so let's just check that that works, and there we go. It prints out this thing 5 times, so it's gone through that loop. So that's worth, so follow along, type this in if you're having trouble with the for loops, and check that works. Now obviously that's not terribly interesting, and we won't get into any complex applications in this video, but one thing that you do want to do is to start accessing the value of the counter within the loop. That's normally what we might do. So for instance, we could put in, let's say, something like this, and that's going to, the point of that is it will now print out a new line, and then it will print the value of the counter once, which is going from 1 up to 5, and then whatever else is in the command. So if we run this version of it, you can now see quite explicitly, and this is the good thing to do if you're having trouble following loops, is literally print out what the counter is doing. Okay, so you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the value of the counter as this loop has been executed 5 times. And then obviously, if you can do that, then you can start applying operations to the counter and stuff like that. Okay. Back to there. All right. Now another thing that we've done, which is worth practicing if you're having trouble following how these loops are working, is that we've put multiple loops together. We put one loop inside another, for instance. So we've got kind of like an outside loop, which is this one here, the once loop, and then we might have another one, and we won't call it twice because that would be predictable. We'll just call it for j is 1 to 4, let's say, just pick some number. So this is just a sequence which you can specify explicitly in there. You don't always have to specify a separate sequence object like that. And we could just put in something inside of here. So let's say cat. And to show clearly what's going on, let's print out the counters explicitly here inside of this second loop. So the way that this second loop is going to work is that each time we go through this outside loop, so once is equal to 1, and then we'll go through this loop 4 times, and then we'll finish, and then we'll put once is equal to 2, and then this loop will run another 4 times, and so on. And if we print out what these loops are doing, then we'll see that explicitly going on. So we might say we'll print out the value for once, let's say, like this. So once is equal to that. So that's the outside counter, right? And let's also print out the inside counter. So what, let's say, put in a comma and then just put in the value for j, something like that. And then we'll put in j, and with this cat command you have to tell it to do a new line, otherwise it'll just go running across the screen. So something like that I think will work. So what we're looking for now is just printing out at each stage as it's going through these commands what the values of the counters are. Let's try that and see. Yeah, that looks good. So what you can see is we run through that. First of all, we go into this loop, it's executed once, the counter is 1, I have someone who needs me, and then it goes into the second loop, right? It's now inside of this loop, and once has taken, it's still equal to 1, and then we cycle through the values for j, one after the other, and they're getting printed out over here. And once that's finished, we then go around back to the outside loop, and increase once to its next value, which is 2, and then we go and run around this loop 4 times again, printing those values out. Okay, so if you're having trouble keeping track of how a sequence of loops is working and what the various counters are doing and all that kind of stuff, then literally just print these things out like this, okay, or just print them using print or cat, it doesn't matter, but have a look at what's going on in those counters, and that can help to make it clearer in your mind as to how the loops are working. Now, a very common thing to do with these kinds of loops and the counters and so on is to be accessing different elements within a matrix or a list or some other object like that. So, for instance, we could do something like this. We set up an empty matrix out here, a matrix that might have, let's have one row for each of the elements of the My Life thing, so 5 of those. And let's have some columns corresponding to each of the j values, so that could be 4. Okay, so I'm setting up a matrix here. This will be an empty matrix at this point. It'll just be full of missing values with one row for each of these 5 elements and one column for each of those 4 elements. And then when we're inside of this loop here, we could just do something like a very simple operation such as the row corresponding to once and the column corresponding to j. And we could put into that something like, you know, the sum of those 2 elements. And you can see, from what we've printed out here, you can see what this is going to be doing, right? You can see that this will be taking, you know, going back up here, 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, and that's going to get put into element 1, 1 of this matrix, and then element 1, 2 is going to be 1 plus 2, which is 3, and so on. So it's basically going to be filling up this matrix that we've created here with all of the sums of these numbers. And once that's complete, we can print the matrix lower that. There we go. We can print the matrix and just see that it's done what we think it was doing. And there you go. So down the end there we have the matrix. So element 1, 1 is just the sum of those 2. You know, 1 plus 2 is 3, 1 plus 3 is 4, and so on. 5 plus 4 is 9. So a loop can be used to kind of work through the elements of a matrix and, you know, fill it up or extract those elements and do something with them. So I would encourage you, if you're struggling with the idea of what these how these loops work, just set up really simple ones like this. Print out the contents of the counters and the contents of the objects that you're working on, and over time you'll get your head around them, I'm sure.